You sabotaged my ass, society, and the cops, and the system. A raped woman got executed.
I don't want to die! Please don't let me die! Somebody! Don't let me die!
Women have constituted a small minority of those executed throughout history. Of 16,047 confirmed executions in the United States between 1608 and 2022, only 576 were women, about 3.6%. This pattern holds true globally, where female executions remain relatively rare compared to male ones. United States of America, Salem witch trials victims. The Salem witch trials of 1692 and 1693 stand as one of the most notorious episodes of mass hysteria and miscarriage of justice in American history. In total, 19 people were hanged, 1 was pressed to death under stones, and at least 5 died in prison. Of those executed, 14 were women. Little is known about the final meals of those condemned during the Salem witch trials. Prison conditions at the time were harsh, and prisoners were expected to pay for their own food and lodging while incarcerated. Many families spent their life savings trying to support their loved ones in prison. The condemned likely received simple fare, perhaps bread and water, or whatever basic provisions their families could afford to provide. The final words of several victims, however, were recorded for posterity. Among the most famous was Giles Corey, who refused to stand trial. When subjected to pressing, having stones placed on his chest until he would enter a plea, his only words were reportedly, "More weight." His defiance became legendary. Among the women executed, the final words of many revealed their steadfast claims of innocence. On June 10, 1692, Bridget Bishop became the first to be hanged. Before her death, she maintained, "I am no witch. I am innocent. I know nothing of it." Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old respected church member, was hanged on July 19th. Her final words spoke to her faith. "I am innocent as the child unborn, but surely what sin hath God found out in me unrepented of, that he should lay such an affliction on me in my old age?" Mary Easty, who was executed on September 22nd, used her final statement not only to proclaim her innocence, but to beg the court to end the madness. "I petition to your honors not for my own life, for I know I must die, but if it be possible that no more innocent blood be shed." Martha Corey, executed the same day as Mary Easty, began her final prayer at the gallows, but as historian Cotton Mather reported, the accusers said the black man stood and dictated to her. Her prayer was cut short by her execution. Sarah Good, hanged in July, directed her final words at one of her accusers, Reverend Nicholas Noyes. When he urged her to confess, she responded with defiance, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." These women faced death with remarkable dignity, many using their final moments to assert their innocence or express faith in divine justice. While the historical record offers little about their final meals, their last words provide a window into their courage in the face of a terrible injustice, one that would later be acknowledged by the Massachusetts government, which eventually exonerated all the victims of the Salem witch trials. Ruth Snyder. Ruth Snyder became infamous not only for her crime, but for her execution, the first to be photographed. On January 12, 1928, she died in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison in New York for the murder of her husband, Albert. Born May Ruth Brown in 1895, Snyder conspired with her lover Judd Gray to murder her husband for his insurance money. The case became a media sensation, with Snyder portrayed as a Viking ice matron and a femme fatale who had led her lover astray. The trial revealed a cold-blooded plot. Snyder had convinced her husband to purchase insurance, then with Gray's help, murdered him while attempting to disguise the crime as a burglary gone wrong. For her final meal, Snyder and her accomplice Gray shared the same menu, reportedly chosen by Gray: chicken broth, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, celery, stuffed olives, and ice cream. This relatively hearty final repast reflected typical American comfort food of the era. a traditional meal before a modern form of execution. As Snyder was led to the electric chair ahead of Gray, she reportedly said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," echoing the words of Jesus on the cross. This biblical quotation expressed either genuine spiritual forgiveness or a calculated attempt to portray herself sympathetically in her final moments. Snyder's execution gained notoriety when a photographer from the New York Daily News, Tom Howard, smuggled a small camera strapped to his ankle into the death chamber. The resulting photograph, showing Snyder at the moment the electricity coursed through her body, was published on the front page of the Daily News. It became one of the most famous tabloid photographs in history and led to stricter protocols for executions. Mary Surratt. Mary Elizabeth Surratt holds the grim distinction of being the first woman executed by the United States federal government. Her hanging on July 7, 1865, marked one of the final chapters in the national trauma of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Surratt ran a boarding house in Washington, D.C., where John Wilkes Booth and his conspirators met to plan the assassination of President Lincoln. Her precise level of involvement became a matter of heated debate. Despite maintaining her innocence until the end, she was convicted by a military tribunal of conspiracy in Lincoln's murder. Her case was controversial from the start. A military rather than civilian trial, questionable evidence, and her status as a woman all factored into public discomfort with her sentence. 5 of the 9 military commissioners who convicted her signed a petition for clemency, but newly inaugurated President Andrew Johnson refused to intervene. No records survive of Mary Surratt's final meal. In the chaos and controversy surrounding her execution, such details were not preserved. What we do know comes from eyewitness accounts of her final moments at the gallows. As she ascended the 13 steps to the scaffold, Surratt appeared weak and needed assistance. The summer heat was oppressive that day, nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Dressed in a black dress and veil, she was visibly shaken by the sight of the noose. Her final recorded words were simple but haunting. Looking at those about to execute her, she reportedly pleaded, "Please don't let me fall." Some accounts suggest these words referred to her physical unsteadiness on the scaffold, while others interpret them as a spiritual plea. Moments before the trap door opened beneath her feet, she reportedly reiterated her innocence one final time, stating, "I am innocent. I am innocent." After her death, public sentiment shifted dramatically. Many who had supported her execution began questioning whether justice had truly been served. Her daughter Anna petitioned for years to retrieve her mother's body, which had initially been buried in an unmarked grave at the prison yard. Eventually, Mary Surratt's remains were interred in Mount Olivet Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Carla Faye Tucker. Carla Faye Tucker gained international attention as the first woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. Her case sparked debate because of her remarkable transformation in prison. In 1983, Tucker and her boyfriend, high on drugs, broke into the apartment of Jerry Lynn Dean with the intention of stealing motorcycle parts. The robbery turned shockingly violent when Tucker repeatedly struck Dean with a pickaxe, later killing his companion Deborah Thornton as well. The brutality of her crime shocked the public. During her 14 years on death row, Tucker underwent a profound conversion to Christianity. Her apparent redemption led many religious leaders, including televangelist Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, to advocate for clemency. But Texas Governor George W. Bush refused to grant a reprieve. For her final meal, Tucker chose a simple, almost ascetic selection that stood in stark contrast to the indulgent fare often requested by condemned prisoners. She asked for a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. Light, healthy foods that perhaps reflected her spiritual transformation. When it came time for her final statement on February 3, 1998, Tucker addressed the families of her victims directly. "Yes, sir, I would like to say to all of you, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I am so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this." She then turned her attention to her loved ones, saying, "I love all of you very much. I am going to be face to face with Jesus now." These final words reflected the faith that had become central to her identity during her years of incarceration. Among the witnesses to her execution was Ronald Carlson, the brother of victim Deborah Thornton, who had initially supported Tucker's execution, but later, influenced by her redemption, opposed it. Tucker was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m. Aileen Wuornos.
Whatever's beyond, I know it's going to be good because I didn't do anything as wrong as they said. I did the right thing.
Arguably America's most notorious female serial killer, Aileen Wuornos worked as a prostitute along Florida's highways in the late 80s and early 90s. Between 1989 and 1990, she killed 7 men, shooting them at point-blank range and robbing them. While she initially claimed all the killings were in self-defense against men who had assaulted her, she later recanted these statements. Wuornos had a catastrophically traumatic childhood. Abandoned by her mother, and with a father who was imprisoned for child sexual abuse, she was raised by her grandparents. By age 11, she was engaging in sexual activities in exchange for food, drugs, and cigarettes. Her early life was marred by abuse, homelessness, and desperation. After her convictions, Wuornos became increasingly unstable, even firing her legal team and voluntarily ending her appeals process. She wrote to the Florida Supreme Court stating she was of sound mind and wished to be executed. Her declining mental state was evident in her final days. For her last meal, Wuornos declined the traditional special request that most condemned prisoners make. She simply asked for a single cup of black coffee, a spare choice that perhaps reflected her desire to be lucid in her final moments, or maybe indicated her general disinterest in worldly comforts as death approached. Wuornos's final words, spoken before her execution by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, were as bizarre and unsettling as much of her life had been. She said, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back. I'll be back." These strange, rambling final words, with their references to the sci-fi film Independence Day, revealed the disturbed mental state in which Wuornos met her end. Her story later became the subject of the Academy Award-winning film Monster, with Charlize Theron portraying Wuornos. Teresa Lewis.
And convicted for the 2 hired killings of her husband and stepson, Teresa Lewis is set to die on Virginia's death row. And time is running out for Teresa Lewis.
Teresa Lewis became the first woman executed by the Commonwealth of Virginia in nearly a century when she died by lethal injection on September 23, 2010. Her crime was particularly cold-blooded. She orchestrated the murders of her husband, Julian Lewis, and her stepson, Charles, for insurance money. In 2002, Lewis met 2 young men at a Walmart store and began sexual relationships with both of them. She then plotted with these men, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller, to kill her husband and stepson for the insurance payout. On the night of October 30, 2002, she left the door to her home unlocked so the men could enter and shoot her sleeping family members. What made Lewis's case particularly controversial was her limited intellectual capacity, with an IQ reportedly just above the threshold for mental retardation, and the fact that the 2 triggermen received life sentences while she got death. Her defenders argued she had been manipulated by the more intelligent Schallenberger. However, the dying words of her husband, "My wife knows who done this to me," weighed heavily against her. For her final meal, Lewis requested comfort food: 2 fried chicken breasts, sweet peas with butter, a Dr. Pepper, and apple pie for dessert. This hearty, traditional American meal perhaps represented a last taste of home comforts before her execution. As she faced death, Lewis appeared visibly frightened and tense when she entered the death chamber. When given the opportunity to speak her last words, she directed a brief but emotional message to her stepdaughter, the only surviving member of the family she had destroyed. "I just want Kathy to know I love her, and I'm very sorry." Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield holds a grim distinction in American legal history as the first woman executed after the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976. Nicknamed the Death Row Granny, Barfield was in her 50s when executed for the poisoning death of her fiancé, Stuart Taylor. Barfield's story is one of addiction and desperation. After the death of her first husband from cancer, she developed a dependency on prescription tranquilizers. She eventually began forging checks to support her habit, then poisoning those who discovered her forgeries. Though convicted only of Taylor's murder, she confessed to killing 3 others, including her own mother. While on death row, Barfield underwent a religious conversion, becoming a born-again Christian. She spent her time counseling other inmates and even wrote a memoir titled Woman on Death Row. For her final meal, Barfield chose a simple repast, a bag of cheese doodles and a bottle of Coca-Cola. This modest selection, combining a salty snack with a sweet drink, seems almost childlike in its simplicity. Perhaps a last comfort food from a simpler time in her life before addiction and murder. Barfield was executed by lethal injection on November 2, 1984. Before her death, she expressed remorse for her crimes and reaffirmed her faith. I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has supported me all these 6 years. Kelly Gissendaner.
All right, breaking now into CNN as we reported at the top of the hour here. We're now learning that Kelly Gissendaner, she's the first woman in death row in 70 years in the state of Georgia.
Kelly Gissendaner was executed by the state of Georgia on September 30th, 2015, becoming the first woman put to death in that state in 70 years. Her crime was particularly callous. She convinced her lover, Gregory Owen, to kill her husband, Doug Gissendaner, in 1997. What made Gissendaner's case notable was not just her gender, but her remarkable transformation during her 18 years on death row. She earned a theology certificate through a prison program connected to Emory University, became a spiritual advisor to other inmates, and maintained a correspondence with renowned theologian Jürgen Moltmann. Despite pleas for clemency from her children, who had forgiven her for orchestrating their father's murder, the Pope, and numerous religious leaders impressed by her reformation, Gissendaner's execution proceeded as scheduled. For her last meal, Gissendaner selected an indulgent feast: cheese dip with chips, Texas fajita nachos, and a diet frosted lemonade. This substantial final meal, containing comfort foods with rich flavors, was a stark contrast to the simpler choices of some other condemned women. Gissendaner's final statement began with a prayer. Loving God, I thank you. She then apologized to the victim's family. I sincerely apologize to the Gissendaner family for the pain I caused, and I hope they find peace. She continued with words for her own family. I love you. I love you. I love you. I am so proud of you. Her last recorded words were a verse from Amazing Grace. Tell the world I'm free. God's mercy here has been abundant. Wanda Jean Allen. Wanda Jean Allen was executed by the state of Oklahoma in 2001 for the murder of her girlfriend, Gloria Leathers. Her case gained attention because she was the first black woman executed in the United States in the modern era. Allen and Leathers had met in prison, where Allen was serving time for manslaughter. She had previously killed another girlfriend. Their relationship was troubled and volatile. The fatal confrontation occurred outside a police station where Leathers had gone to file a complaint against Allen. Allen shot Leathers in the stomach. Allen's defense team argued that she had diminished mental capacity, with an IQ of only 81. They also highlighted her difficult background, which included poverty and abuse. However, these mitigating factors did not sway the courts or the governor. For her final meal, Allen kept it extraordinarily simple, requesting only a bag of potato chips. This modest choice, perhaps reflecting a childlike comfort food, stands in stark contrast to more elaborate final meal requests. Her last moments were marked by controversy. Some witnesses reported that Allen stuck her tongue out at those watching her execution, a final act of defiance or perhaps childishness that seemed to confirm negative perceptions of her character. Allen's short life and troubled end highlight issues of race, class, mental capacity, and sexuality that continue to plague the American criminal justice system. Lisa Montgomery.
This morning, after hours of legal back and forth, the only woman on federal death row has been executed.
Lisa Montgomery was sentenced to death by lethal injection.
Lisa Montgomery holds the somber distinction of being the first woman executed by the federal government in nearly 70 years when she was put to death on January 13, 2021. Montgomery was convicted of a truly horrific crime. In 2004, she strangled a pregnant woman named Bobby Jo Stinnett, then cut the baby from Stinnett's womb and attempted to pass the child off as her own. The infant survived and was later reunited with her father. Montgomery's defense centered on her severe mental illness and history of extreme sexual and physical abuse. Her attorneys argued that she suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, and pseudopsoriasis, false pregnancy. They presented evidence that she had been repeatedly raped as a child and that her mother had subjected her to extreme psychological abuse. Details about Montgomery's final meal have not been widely publicized. The Federal Bureau of Prisons traditionally does not release information about last meals for federal executions, treating them as private matters. What is known comes from her legal team's accounts of her final hours. According to those present at her execution at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana, Montgomery appeared dazed. When asked if she had any last words, she simply responded, "No." It was a quiet end to a life marked by suffering, mental illness, and ultimately, violence. Montgomery's execution was controversial not only because of her mental state, but also because it occurred during the final days of the Trump administration, which had resumed federal executions after a 17-year hiatus. Europe's witch hunts. Between the 14th and 18th centuries, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe. The majority, approximately 75 to 80%, were women. These executions took place primarily in Western Germany, the Low Countries, France, Northern Italy, and Switzerland, peaking between 1580 and 1650. While no systematic records of final meals were kept for most of these executions, historical documents occasionally mention how the condemned spent their final hours. In many regions, the accused witches were provided a hangman's meal or executioner's meal, a tradition that allowed the condemned a modest final repast, often including bread, cheese, and weak beer or wine. This meal served both a ceremonial purpose and a practical one, sustaining the prisoner through what was often a public spectacle of execution. The method of execution varied by region. In England and colonial America, witches were typically hanged. In Scotland, they were strangled and then burned. In continental Europe, burning at the stake was the most common method, based on the belief that fire purified the soul and protected the community from evil. Final words from these women rarely survive in the historical record, but court transcripts sometimes include statements made during trials. Many maintained their innocence until the end. Others, having confessed under torture, might reaffirm their guilt in hope of a quicker death. Some cursed their accusers or the court, while others prayed or recited biblical passages. One notable account comes from Germany, where a woman named Katharina Kepler, mother of the astronomer Johannes Kepler, was accused of witchcraft in 1615. Though she ultimately escaped execution, dying naturally while under house arrest, her reported words during her ordeal speak for many. "I am not a witch. I have not renounced God. I have done no one harm." The mass execution of women as witches represents one of history's most extreme examples of gender-based persecution. Economic factors, religious disputes, and social tensions played roles in these prosecutions, but the overwhelming targeting of women, particularly older, unmarried, or socially marginalized women, reveals how deeply misogyny was embedded in early modern European society. Charlotte Corday. Charlotte Corday became an icon of the French Revolution when she assassinated the radical journalist and political leader Jean-Paul Marat on July 13, 1793. Her murder of Marat, committed while he soaked in a medicinal bath to treat his painful skin condition, has been immortalized in Jacques-Louis David's famous painting, The Death of Marat. Born Marie-Anne Charlotte de Corday d'Armont to an impoverished noble family in Normandy, Corday was a supporter of the more moderate Girondin faction during the French Revolution. She became increasingly alarmed by the radical turn the revolution was taking under the influence of the Jacobins, of whom Marat was a prominent member. Corday's assassination of Marat was meticulously planned. She traveled from her home in Caen to Paris specifically to kill him, believing this act would save France from further bloodshed. She gained access to his residence by claiming to have information about Girondin activities in Normandy. Then she stabbed him once in the chest with a kitchen knife she had purchased earlier that day. Little is known about Corday's final meal before her execution by guillotine on July 17, 1793, just 4 days after her assassination of Marat. The revolutionary government, eager to make an example of her, rushed her trial and execution. In such circumstances, the details of her final meal were not recorded for posterity. Corday's composure at her trial and execution impressed even her enemies. According to contemporary accounts, she remained calm and dignified throughout her trial, readily admitting to the assassination and explaining her political motivations. When asked if she had anything to say in her defense, she famously replied, "I have killed one man to save 100,000. This phrase encapsulates her belief that eliminating Marat would halt the spiral of revolutionary violence that had engulfed France. As Corday faced the guillotine, she reportedly refused a blindfold, choosing instead to face death directly. Her final moments were described by witnesses as marked by remarkable courage. One account from the London Times noted her undaunted composure and calm, decent, and unaffected deportment, even as she approached death. After her execution, rumors circulated that her face had blushed after the blade fell, an entirely unlikely but romantically macabre detail that added to her mystique. She was buried in an unmarked grave at the churchyard of the Madeleine, near the remains of King Louis XVI. Alphonse de Lamartine later gave her the nickname L'Ange de l'Assassinat, the Angel of Assassination, and her act has been the subject of countless artistic, literary, and historical analyses in the centuries since her death. Mata Hari. Few female names evoke the archetype of the femme fatale spy as powerfully as Mata Hari. Executed by a French firing squad on October 15, 1917, for allegedly spying for Germany during World War I, her story blends fact and fiction in a way that still captivates the imagination. Born Margaretha Geertruida Zell in the Netherlands in 1876, the woman who would become Mata Hari transformed herself repeatedly throughout her life. After a failed marriage to a Dutch colonial officer in the East Indies, she reinvented herself in Paris as an exotic dancer claiming Eastern origins. Taking the stage name Mata Hari, Malay for Eye of the Day, she became famous for her sensual performances that often culminated in near-total nudity. Shocking for the era. By the outbreak of World War I, her dancing career had declined, but she maintained relationships with high-ranking military officers and politicians across Europe. Her frequent border crossings during wartime made her suspicious to intelligence agencies. The French eventually arrested her on charges of spying for Germany. The evidence against Mata Hari was largely circumstantial. She had accepted money from a German diplomat, which she claimed was repayment for confiscated property. The most damning evidence was a series of intercepted telegrams that appeared to identify her as Agent H-21. However, many historians now believe these may have been sent by the Germans specifically to implicate her, possibly as revenge for taking their money while providing no useful intelligence. On the morning of her execution at Vincennes outside Paris, Mata Hari was allowed to write 2 letters. For her final meal, she declined any special request, accepting only a cup of black coffee, perhaps to steady her nerves for what was to come. Witnesses described how she faced her execution with remarkable composure. Dressed elegantly in a tailored suit with white gloves and a 3-cornered hat with a veil, she refused a blindfold when facing the firing squad. According to the commander of the execution detail, she did not tremble or faint but stood facing her executioners with dignity. No official record exists of her final words. Some accounts suggest she blew a kiss to the firing squad, but this romantic embellishment is disputed by serious historians. What does seem certain is that she maintained her composure until the end. The firing squad sergeant reportedly commented, "This lady knows how to die." In the century since her execution, historical research has cast substantial doubt on her guilt. The German government officially exonerated her in 1930. Many now believe she was a convenient scapegoat for France, which was suffering devastating losses on the battlefield and needed someone to blame. Germany. Sophie Scholl. Though not as widely known internationally as some others in this chapter, Sophie Scholl stands as one of the most courageous women executed for her convictions in the 20th century. A member of the White Rose resistance group in Nazi Germany, 21-year-old Sophie, her brother Hans, and their friend Christoph Probst were executed by guillotine on February 22, 1943. Born in 1921 in Furstenberg, Sophie initially supported the Hitler Youth movement like many young Germans. However, as she witnessed the reality of Nazi rule, her views changed dramatically. At the University of Munich, she joined her brother Hans in forming the White Rose, a non-violent resistance group that distributed anti-Nazi leaflets. On February 18, 1943, Sophie and Hans were caught distributing leaflets at the university. During her interrogation and trial, Sophie showed extraordinary courage, telling her Nazi judges, "Somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves as we did." No details survive about Sophie Scholl's final meal before her execution. The Nazi regime was not known for honoring such traditions for political prisoners, and the speed with which she was tried and executed just 5 days from arrest to death left little time for such considerations. What we do know is that Sophie faced her death with remarkable courage. Prison guards and witnesses later reported that she remained calm and resolute to the end. When led to the guillotine, Sophie reportedly said to her cellmate, Elsa Goebbels, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day and I have to go. But what does my death matter if through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" Her reported final words before the blade fell were simply, "Die Sonne scheint noch." The sun still shines. Sophie Scholl's short life and courageous death have made her an enduring symbol of moral resistance to tyranny. In modern Germany, she is honored with schools, streets, and monuments bearing her name. And in 2005, she was voted one of the most important Germans of all time. Great Britain. Ruth Ellis. Ruth Ellis holds the distinction of being the last woman executed in Great Britain. Her hanging on July 13, 1955, for the murder of her lover, David Blakely, sparked controversy and contributed to the eventual abolition of capital punishment in the United Kingdom. Born in 1926 in Rhyl, Wales, Ellis worked as a nightclub hostess and model. Her relationship with Blakely, a racing driver, was turbulent and marked by violence. On Easter Sunday, 1955, she shot Blakely 5 times outside the Magdala Tavern in Hampstead, London. She made no attempt to escape and readily admitted to the murder. During her trial, evidence of Blakely's physical abuse of Ellis, including causing her to miscarry after punching her in the stomach, was disallowed. The jury took only 23 minutes to find her guilty, and she was sentenced to death. Ellis's final meal consisted of tongue, fried onions, and potatoes, followed by coffee, simple fare that reflected the austere conditions of Holloway Prison where she was held. She declined an alcoholic drink that was traditionally offered to the condemned. Before her execution, Ellis refused to appeal her sentence or accept a petition for clemency. She reportedly told her lawyers, "I want to die." Her calm acceptance of her fate stunned many observers. As she walked to the gallows, witnesses noted her composure, though she had taken sedatives. Ellis's final words were not recorded, but in her last letter to her family she wrote, "I'm quite happy with the verdict, but not the way the story was told. I'm dying tomorrow, but I'm quite happy." Her execution at age 28 caused significant public outcry. Many felt she should have been convicted of manslaughter rather than murder due to provocation and possible mental disturbance. The controversy contributed to a growing movement against capital punishment in Britain, which was suspended in 1965 and permanently abolished for murder in 1969. Saudi Arabia. Dira Square women. Saudi Arabia maintains one of the highest execution rates in the world, with beheading as the primary method. Public executions traditionally take place after Friday prayers in Dira Square in Riyadh, informally known as Chop Chop Square. While men make up the vast majority of those executed, women are not exempt. Exact statistics on female executions in Saudi Arabia are difficult to obtain due to limited transparency. However, women have been executed for crimes ranging from adultery and apostasy to murder and drug trafficking. The kingdom's interpretation of Islamic law, or Sharia, forms the basis for its criminal code. One notable case was that of Rizana Nafiq, a Sri Lankan domestic worker executed in 2013 for the alleged murder of an infant in her care. She was just 17 at the time of the incident and claimed the baby accidentally choked. Despite international outcry and evidence that her confession was obtained under duress without proper translation, she was beheaded. No information is available about final meals for those executed in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi system does not publicly observe this tradition. The condemned are typically given no advance notice of their execution date, being informed only on the morning of their death. As for last words, these are rarely documented in Saudi executions. The process typically involves the condemned being led to the square, made to kneel, and then beheaded with a single sword stroke, often without opportunity for final statements. The Saudi justice system continues to draw international criticism for its use of capital punishment, particularly for crimes that many countries do not consider capital offenses, such as drug possession, witchcraft, and homosexuality. For female defendants, the situation is often compounded by restrictions on their legal representation and rights during trial. Iran. Women of even prison. Iran has one of the highest execution rates per capita in the world. Women constitute a minority of those executed, but their numbers are not insignificant. Many female executions take place at Evin Prison in Tehran, notorious for its political prisoner wing and harsh conditions. Under the Islamic Republic's legal system, women can be executed for crimes including murder, drug trafficking, and moharebe, enmity against God, a broad charge often used against political dissidents. The age of criminal responsibility in Iran is particularly concerning. 9 for girls and 15 for boys, meaning teenage girls can legally face capital punishment. One high-profile case was that of Rayhane Jabari, a 26-year-old woman executed in 2014 for the murder of a former intelligence officer. Jabari claimed she acted in self-defense when he attempted to sexually assault her. Despite international protests, she was hanged after spending 7 years on death row. Information about final meals for those executed in Iran is not publicly documented. The Iranian penal system does not formally observe this tradition, at least not in any way that is shared with the public or media. Final words, however, have sometimes been preserved through messages smuggled out of prison or shared with family members during final visits. Jabari, for instance, recorded an emotional voice message to her mother that was later made public. "I don't want to rot under the soil. I don't want my eye or my young heart to turn into dust. Beg so that it is arranged that as soon as I am hanged, my heart, kidney, eye, bones, and anything that can be transplanted be taken away from my body and given to someone who needs them." These harrowing words reveal the humanity and lingering hopes of those facing an immutable death sentence, that some good might come from their end. Japan. Hideko Hakamada. Japan maintains the death penalty primarily for multiple murders, carrying it out by hanging in secluded prison gallows. One of the most controversial cases involving a female defendant was that of Hideko Hakamada, who was sentenced to death along with her brother Iwao for the 1966 murder of their boss and his family. Iwao spent 48 years on death row, believed to be the world's longest, before being temporarily released in 2014 when a court ordered a retrial based on evidence tampering. Hideko's sentence was eventually commuted to life imprisonment. The Japanese penal system is known for its secrecy surrounding executions. Condemned prisoners are typically not told of their execution date until the morning it is to be carried out, sometimes just an hour or two before. This practice has been criticized by human rights organizations for the extreme psychological toll it takes, keeping prisoners in a state of constant anxiety. Information about final meals for the executed in Japan is not publicly disclosed. The highly secretive nature of Japanese executions means such details remain unknown to the public. Similarly, last words are rarely, if ever, made public. Japan's justice system has faced criticism not only for maintaining capital punishment, but for the secretive and psychologically torturous manner in which it is carried out. Prisoners can spend decades in solitary confinement, never knowing which day will be their last. North Korea. Female political prisoners. North Korea maintains one of the world's most secretive and brutal penal systems. Public executions are carried out for crimes ranging from political dissent to watching foreign media or practicing Christianity. While exact statistics are impossible to obtain due to the closed nature of the regime, reports from defectors and human rights organizations suggest women are not spared. In 2013, reports emerged that Kim Jong-un had ordered the execution of his ex-girlfriend, singer Hyun Song-wol, along with a dozen other performers for allegedly making pornographic videos. Later reports suggested she might still be alive, highlighting the difficulty of obtaining accurate information about executions in North Korea. More recently, in 2019, a female prison guard who defected reported witnessing numerous executions of women in detention facilities, including for offenses such as smuggling Chinese mobile phones or South Korean media. Given the extreme secrecy of the North Korean regime, no information exists about final meals or last words of those executed. Executions are often carried out summarily, with little formal process and no consideration for humane traditions observed in other countries. Public executions in North Korea reportedly serve as warnings to others, with local residents, including children, sometimes forced to attend. This practice turns execution into a tool of mass terrorization rather than merely a punishment for the condemned individual. Marie Antoinette. Perhaps no female execution has captured the public imagination as completely as that of Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France before the French Revolution. Born an Austrian archduchess, she married into the French royal family at age 14, eventually becoming queen when her husband ascended the throne as Louis XVI in 1774. As the French Revolution intensified, Marie Antoinette became a symbol of the excesses of the monarchy. Though many of the accusations against her were exaggerated or entirely fabricated, including the famous quote, "Let them eat cake," which she almost certainly never uttered, public hatred toward her became intense. After the monarchy was abolished in 1792, both she and her husband were imprisoned. Following Louis XV's execution by guillotine in January 1793, Marie Antoinette was held in increasingly harsh conditions at the Conciergerie prison in Paris. After a brief show trial in October of that year, she too was condemned to death for treason and other crimes against the state. On the morning of October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette prepared to meet her end. Accounts of her final meal vary, but according to some sources, she declined substantial food, accepting only a cup of hot chocolate or bouillon, beef broth. This simple final sustenance marked a stark contrast to the lavish feasts she had once presided over at Versailles. She dressed with care in a simple white dress, white being the color of mourning for French queens. Her hair, which had turned completely white during her imprisonment, was cut short by the executioner, a final humiliation before her death. Marie Antoinette was transported to the Place de la Révolution, now Place de la Concorde, on an open cart rather than in a closed carriage, a deliberate tactic to expose her to public ridicule. Despite the jeers of the crowd, contemporary accounts suggest she maintained her composure and dignity. As she climbed the steps to the scaffold, the 37-year-old former queen accidentally stepped on the foot of her executioner. Her final recorded words were an apology to him. "Pardon, monsieur. I did not do it on purpose." This small act of politeness in the face of imminent death has been seen by many as a final display of the regal bearing she had been raised to embody. At 12:15 p.m., the blade of the guillotine fell, ending the life of a woman who had once been the most glamorous and envied figure in Europe. Her body was initially buried in an unmarked grave at the Madeleine Cemetery. In 1815, during the Bourbon Restoration, her remains were exhumed and reinterred in the traditional royal burial site at the Basilica of Saint-Denis. Marie Antoinette's execution marked not only the end of a controversial figure, but also symbolized the radical turn of the French Revolution toward the period known as the Reign of Terror. Her story continues to fascinate, with countless books, films, and works of art dedicated to exploring her complex legacy. ASIA Women of Imperial China. China executes more people annually than all other countries combined, according to estimates by human rights organizations. While men constitute the majority of those executed, women are not exempt, particularly those convicted of drug trafficking or corruption. In 2015, the case of Li Yan drew international attention. A victim of severe domestic abuse, Li killed her husband after enduring months of torture, including being burned with cigarettes and having part of her finger chopped off. Despite evidence of the abuse, she was sentenced to death. Following international pressure, her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. More commonly, female executions in China involve foreign nationals convicted of drug trafficking. In 2013, China executed Liu Yiqiong, a wealthy businesswoman known as the godmother of Chongqing, for running one of the country's largest drug trafficking rings and involvement in organized crime. Information about final meals in Chinese executions is not publicly available. The Chinese system does not observe or report on this tradition. Similarly, last words are rarely documented as executions are carried out with minimal ceremony. China's preferred method of execution has traditionally been a bullet to the back of the head, though lethal injection has become more common in recent years as a more humane alternative. Executions are typically carried out promptly after the final appeal is rejected, sometimes within days or weeks. The stories of these executed women span continents, centuries, and cultures. Their crimes range from the truly horrific to the politically motivated to cases of profound injustice. Their final meals, when recorded, range from elaborate feasts to simple comforts to nothing at all. Their last words vary from expressions of remorse to declarations of innocence, from religious devotion to cryptic utterances that continue to puzzle historians. What unites them is their humanity in the face of state-sanctioned death. The rituals surrounding execution, the final meal, the last words, serve as reminders that even those judged unfit to live among society remain human beings capable of preference, expression, and dignity.